Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're at in the world. To all of you out in the audience, thank you for joining us today for the 6th episode of Screens Unscripted. For anybody who's joining us for the first time, this is a series of fireside chats that is meant as an opportunity to explore innovation and trends in digital signage and display technology with industry subject matter experts. Once again, as I have through the other episodes, well, except not for the first one, I suppose, because you can't have a repeat audience attendee. But I see some familiar names in the audience, so for those of you returning, welcome back. For those of you joining us for the first time, thank you for being here. We greatly appreciate it. For those of you new to the series, before we get into all of the important stuff and our special guest, who you are all here to actually listen to, not just me, my name is Jonathan Braun. I'm a principal here at Braun Consulting. I am a director of the Digital Signage Experts Group, and I am a board of directors member for the Digital Signage Federation. So before we go any further, I would get in a whole lot of trouble if I did not thank our sponsor, Sony, for helping us produce this series. They are an outstanding producer of digital signage display technologies and an advisory council member to the Digital Signage Federation. So we are very happy to have their participation and support here. Today we have a very, very special guest, as I mentioned, but before I ask him to introduce himself, I'm going to do just a quick bit of housekeeping for all of you out in the audience. Number one, you probably figured this out from what you heard when I launched the webinar, but everyone is on mute currently. Please, if you would like to ask a question or have any comments, use the chat or Q&A feature of GoToWebinar. There's going to be boxes for that in the menu on the right-hand side of your screen, unless you moved it, at which point I have no idea where you put it, so you're on your own for that one. But please do use that to communicate with myself or our esteemed guests. I will be more than happy to facilitate those questions as we go for us, so don't worry about that too much. Also, we always get the question, a recording will be produced of this session. So if you want to share this with any of your colleagues, or if you want to review it, please, by all means. We will be sending out an automatic email from GoToWebinar, so keep an eye out for that. But also, Sony is being kind enough to host these on their YouTube channel for us, and so you'll be able to view and share it from there. Also, as I always like to point out, this is an ongoing series of discussions with industry luminaries like today's guest. So please do stay tuned for future episodes. We have a bunch more planned. We're going to be going into season 2 of Screens Unscripted now in 2025. So we got a whole bunch of new things planned out for you. But if you have any topic suggestions or guest suggestions, let us know. Feel free to contact us. My email was in all of the invites and in the sign up. Feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to get that kind of feedback. Okay, now on to what's actually important. We have a very special guest today with us from NowSignage. I am super looking forward to our conversation with him. Our topic today is going to focus on QSR and how dynamic digital signage is transforming the customer experience, which to me is, I think, really, really important. And we're going to get into how that means more than menu boards for everybody out there. This is obviously a pretty key vertical for digital signage in a lot of ways. So let's get to what you're here for. I'd like to thank our special guest, Nick. Thank you for being here. I'd love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience, talk a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you all do at NowSignage for those who aren't familiar with you.
Yeah, sure. Nice to see everyone today. Thanks for the intro there, Jonathan. Yeah, I'm really excited about this one, actually. It's we've got a lot of things to cover in this topic today. I'm Nick Johnson, the CEO and co-founder of NowSignage. We're a UK-based company. I'm actually over in snowy Sweden, which is where I'm based, which is where I've got my cozy fireside chat jumper on and my very British mug of tea here. So yeah, in terms of NowSignage, as I say, are a UK-based digital signage CMS that manages multi-screen networks for global brands. So brands who are looking for enterprise technology at an affordable price. We work across all sectors really, but QSR is obviously a major sector for us, where we work with very large QSRs globally across 40 different countries globally, where we're powering kind of the digital menu board setups, the window displays, the dining experiences, or the drive-through. So we're kind of covering all of that technology. So yeah, that's us in a very quick nutshell.
Excellent, thank you. So, you know, I really like that, and I love the focus on QSR, because to me, just looking historically at digital signage, because I've been a generalist, not a specialist in my career working with digital signage over the last 20 years, I suppose, is really been looking at QSR as a key driver in pushing digital signage, not just as a concept, but helping us grow and evolve. And since really we're going to focus on that vertical today, what are your thoughts and your experiences on the importance of QSR to the digital signage industry as a whole? Let's kind of start there.
Yeah, good start. So in terms of the QSR sector, it's obviously a really exciting time for technology partners like ourselves, technology providers. So for starters, there's more fast food chains than ever before out there now. So there's real competition that we're seeing where these QSRs are wanting to stand out. And often the products to some degree are very similar to their competitors. The price points are relatively comparable. So it's essential that a well thought out AV setup and a content strategy can help set them apart. And I'd probably say with three important considerations really. So first of all, be enticing. You need to make me want to go into your restaurant over any other of the competitors' restaurants. So that's where we can kind of touch on the storytelling and all of that side of things in a QSR experience. Number two, I'd probably say be engaging. You want me to stay inside your restaurant and you want me to keep coming back. So I think that's where the power of all the loyalty programs is really, really powerful as well. And then thirdly, I'd say be targeted. You need me to make me spend my money and ultimately on the products that you want to sell most of as well. So that's where things like triggers and upsells and POS integrations and stock rotations, all of that comes into that, making sure that the content is as targeted as possible. So we can of course go into those 3 points and start to unpack them today. But essentially, I'd probably say what we're seeing is that the QSRs that can blend technology with the personalized experience, they're the ones who are maximizing that kind of customer spend within the store. And they're also the ones that are creating that dining experience to keep the customers coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really has become, I think, at least in my experience, in my work with QSRs, because I've worked on a few menu board projects and other things as well, has really been, now this is becoming kind of the default setting where they're assuming now, okay, I'm going to have to, if you're a QSR of any size, but even the regional ones or even local ones, I see that around town here in San Diego, where this has kind of become the default setting. We know we need to go to digital. And so that means at the very minimum, they're putting in digital menu boards, right? That kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
That kind of gels with what you're seeing as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I think because there's so many of them, and it's hard to compete on product, it's hard to compete on price. So we're looking at alternatives. We're looking at how can we use technology to drive that footfall into my restaurant, and obviously things like the Sony displays where we can synchronize all the content across the screens, or really impressive LED ribbons that you get around entrances. All of those are capturing eyes and bringing you into the store. So there needs to be a reason to bring someone in and make them stay in that store environment.
Yeah, and I think you're highlighting, and I wanted to set this up because this was the part of the conversation I was most excited to get to. Because again, it's so easy for people to just focus on the menu boards or the screens in drive-through. But no pun intended, we're dealing with a much bigger picture here. And you hit a bunch of those.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. We're dealing with implementation of things that are far more than just menu boards, right? So you mentioned things like a big LED ribbon or something on the outside, or we see that here, stateside in areas like Vegas, where one of our, since I do live in San Diego, I'll bring it up, one of our kind of local heroes, In-N-Out Burger, is doing this massive deployment where it's an experiential thing. Where
exactly, yeah,
the restaurant. So this is really becoming much more about a larger customer experience, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's the classic stat of digital signage captures 400% more views than kind of printed adverts. So that whole experiential thing, we're seeing it the same with some of the customers we're working with, like Wingstop and Taco Bell, where they are heavily investing in that technology, because what they want to do is they want to create their store more as a destination where they're appealing to the target demographic, so they communicate with them and tell them the right story to draw them into that environment. And it's also an environment that they're wanting to create where they want those customers to be seen by their peers, and they want to be seen by their peers in there. So it almost creates this meeting place in a way. It's not just a fast food environment where I'm making a transaction. It's somewhere where I want to go and I want to be seen, and that's where digital signage certainly helps create that experience.
Yeah, almost kind of like that historical third space concept that we used to have, where you would see, whether it's like over in the UK where you'd have the local pub, or we used to have spaces like more traditional coffee houses or even bars here, where you'd have more of a space where you wanted to go and be, not just kind of the historical QSR from, oh, I'm going to go to my local McDonald's, I'm going to grab my meal, it's cheap, it's fast, it's there, I go, I grab it, I sit down, I eat it, and I leave. We're building more of an experiential issue, because of course there's also the whole concept of I can stay at home and DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever. And yeah, I might still patronize that restaurant, but it's not the same, right? I'm not building the same connection, the same loyalty. So I'm trying to drive bringing people into the stores, not just the kind of like what we're dealing with retail as a whole, where it's not just why do I go to, Walmart versus Target, but why do I do anything at all? I can just order it off Amazon and have it here the next day. So why am I dealing with, one brand over it? So it's kind of that same concept, right? Where I'm trying to get you to come into the store. It's an experience where it's visually engaging. You've got a content kind of story to tell, right? Where you're trying to build that brand, that customer loyalty, that customer connection, right? So that's kind of almost a concept of storytelling that I don't think a lot of people really consider when they're thinking about implementation of digital signage at QSR. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, storytelling goes all the way back. It's one of the most powerful forms of communication, telling it in a story for both retention and persuasion of someone. Even growing up as a kid, you were told stories, weren't you, to kind of teach you things, or to help you make the right decisions. They're all communicated through stories. So QSR is no different, really. We know that 65% of Americans still consume fast food at least once a week. So there's clearly a want to go to the stores. So what the QSRs need to do really is they need to create a desire to entice the customer into the store, to take them through that journey, so that the sale's done. And that's kind of where storytelling comes in. I think storytelling's massive, really, and
right.
Arguably, it should be the basis for everything to then follow on from it, because as a technology provider, often end users or integrators who are on this call today, they will come to us for advice on what solutions to provide. But I think before you can get to that point, first you need to understand what is the objective and what narrative does that QSR want to communicate and have and say about their brand, because ultimately that will determine kind of how customers are perceive their brand, what technology gets implemented, what screens go into the store. I think before you can start to decide that flow through the store and where the content goes and what's happening, first you need to understand that whole storytelling piece to say, what exactly am I trying to tell my customer as they go through the journey in my store?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for using my favorite word, which is objective. Because for anybody in the audience who's taken the Digital Signage Certified Expert program, I know you're all tired of hearing me harp on about objectives, but it is the most important word in digital signage. So thank you, Nick. I really appreciate the validation.
You didn't plug me for that.
This is Screens Unscripted, folks. Honestly, we didn't plan that. I appreciate the validation. No, it's a really important concept, because that shapes so much of what we do. Because if you know what your objective, your business outcome is, you tend to then be able to shape what your message is going to be to accomplish that. And that helps you dictate who your audience is. And we start looking at like QSR, and it's the same kind of concept with retail as a whole. But when we look at QSR, the more targeted and localized you can make your content, the more impactful you can create. It's better. Right?
I think another way to look at it, it's an article that I've read before, is that well-designed digital promotions and menu boards, they should almost be like a good waiter in a restaurant. The objective of a waiter in a restaurant is to welcome you to that restaurant, to set the tone for the restaurant, to subtly influence you with buying decisions by calling out kind of specials or high margin items along the way to help you buy that and ultimately make a purchase within the restaurant. And I think that's what digital signage is doing. It's almost acting as that waiter. If you really consider it, you should be trying to convert that person throughout the store to buy the product that you want them to buy. And I think as well, just adding on to this storytelling, there's kind of, if we dive a little bit deeper into it, a customer's response to an advert can really be based on two things. You either base it on an emotion, or it can be based on a reason. So I think, again, it's really important to understand that when designing your content and the flow of content through the store, because emotional storytelling builds a connection, whereas reason-based storytelling drives rational decisions. So what we're saying here is that if a customer's journey, first of all, if we can plant a desire and create urgency, that's using emotion. You're creating desire, building urgency. That's an emotional based kind of message. And then you then reinforce that messaging with reason-based examples. So an example of that might be the classic KFC finger licking good. That if that was on a call to action on a window poster, that is an emotional response that I'm getting there. Finger licking good, graphic, that's an emotional response. Similar to if the graphic on the call to action said something like a taste like home. Again, that's evoking nostalgia about eating at home. So again, it's an emotional response to drive me in. But then you need to hit that same product with then your reason-based, and that's where that comes in. So you might then follow that up with made with locally sourced ingredients, or something about it being the healthiest option, or the best price position. So it's the saver menu or something like that. So you're almost taking the person on that journey to say, I'm going to emotionally connect with you to drive you into the store, and then I'm going to act on reason, because you're going to make a logical decision of which product you're buying. And I think the key here is that if you can get a reaction from your advert, then you can drive an action, and that's what a QSR needs to be doing. So I think that's why storytelling for me is so important in this process, that when we're speaking to customers and we're speaking to our integrators and our resellers about projects, often they come out and say, can we do dynamic pricing? Can we do stock rotation? Can we do surge pricing? Yes, of course we can do all of this, but what's the reason? What messages are you actually, what is the objective, as you said? And I think if you understand that story that the QSR is trying to tell through that journey, then you start at that point, and then you can then say, great, well, now I understand that, let's personalize the message by having some real-time data to connect with those users as they go through the store.
Yeah, and that's been a trend that's come up on almost every episode we've had of this show, is that idea of personalization, of targeting, of hyper-local communication, because that's one of the biggest strengths of digital signage as a whole, right? Where I can take and I can say, all right, I'm a QSR, I've got thousands of locations across a nation, but I'm going to have different content because I'm going to appeal to different emotion and to different reason, to use your 2 points there, which are excellent. I'm going to appeal to different people in different areas based on demographic, maybe age, based on region. You know, we have a lot of different cultural approach here in the Southwest, because obviously we have a very large Hispanic population. And so there's a lot of targeting of different messaging that wouldn't work the same as it would in like New England, right? So
yeah,
I think exactly, that's another important aspect of what we're discussing here is as I take that storytelling, and now I'm starting to kind of laser focus it. And then you mentioned earlier things like triggers and other types of dynamic data. So doesn't that continue if I leverage those types of tools to help further build that brand relationship and customer loyalty?
Yeah, absolutely. I think once you understand the journey and the flow of the store, we can then start. That's when you do start getting into the technology where NowSignage provide all of these great enterprise features, and we can start saying, right, well, you need this feature for this reason, and so on. And so this is where you start bringing in automated tools, you bring in the AI stuff, you bring in the CMS functionality to start customizing that. So we can do that to enable us to, as you've touched on there, some things sort of location-based menu changes, dynamic pricing, stock level changes with POS integrations, customer data changes, real-time triggers and demographic changes. All of those changes are then driven by technology. So yeah, we can go into any of those, but yes, you're exactly right. Once we understand kind of that flow, we then start to use the technologies and say, what POS system are you using? Great, we've got an integration with that POS provider, so we can then start doing stock rotation. We can have features like our master menu board flexibility, so that in central New York, the pricing may be different than central Texas or whatever it might be. You can have those variants in the pricing. It's the same product, and all that we're doing is that we're mapping that with the location ID to say, we know exactly where this is with automated technology. Of course, you can't be expecting a QSR to manually control this. If there's thousands and thousands of stores, that automation is essential, but you need to make that as simple as possible in the CMS. You don't want to have 16,000 menu boards to power 16,000 menu boards. What you actually want is you want one master menu board, or a collection of master menu boards, maybe 4 or 5 menu boards, that across those, maybe you've got a Canadian menu board variant, a North American, a Mexican variant, and so on. And then you will use those variants as the master menu board to then dynamically change the components to say, this price is going to be different here, or actually we're going to, we know that there's certain tastes or flavor preferences in certain states and regions where we might want to show different products or different promotions, and we can do all of that with the technology.
Yeah, and actually, kind of as a tangent to the main topic here, I think you're also painting an interesting picture that people need to consider, that this is not just about the communication with the customer on behalf of a QSR, but really there's also an internal efficiency and operational impact to this, right? Where I don't have to deal with, oh, I'm blanket sending out all these menus. I can't manually target every single store, right? You highlighted that perfectly. But I want to do the regional or the national kind of targets. And the more we take and reduce the workload, it's less expensive to implement these things, right? So now a menu change is easier. But then also just the simple level of trying to deal with, oh, you're out of item A, but customers keep asking for item A because they see it on the menu, and that changes their experience. It also takes more time from the staff.
Yeah, exactly. You've touched on something there with the kind of out of stock. So certainly, in answer to your first point there, you're bringing in the efficiencies, absolutely, and making that a lot more scalable for the marketing teams. But you're also making it, you're giving them a lot more flexibility and control over what they can actually do. So on that first kind of point with the stock, if we've got an out of stock piece of information, there's no point in continuing to show that out of stock product. So that there's a few options that you can do. You can centrally control that via kind of the API integrations with the POS systems to say, if there's an out of stock product, we will supplement this with a similar product or a follow-up product. We can of course do that. We've also got a feature called On Demand that actually gives local store control. So a store manager can actually get out their phone and rotate a piece of stock via their mobile phone. So it kind of balances it out to say, we've got great automated experiences to control en masse, but there's always going to be a local instance where they were expecting stock, but it actually didn't arrive in store. So therefore, you don't want to have to then contact head office. The store manager can take over. So I think that's one point. And then the second point is this, giving the marketing team or whoever's controlling the signage the ability to do a lot more with their content. Instead of creating one advert that's a print and it has to stay static there, you can start creating multiple variants of the same advert and say, based on geolocation of the weather, it's raining outside, so I'm going to still show the Big Mac burger, but actually I'm showing a rain variant of it where the messaging is saying, come out of the rain or whatever it might say, and then on a hot day it might change the messaging. So you're creating multiple variants of the advert, and this is where surge pricing and stuff, which I know is very topical at the minute, and I think it's controversial. You're very controversial, certainly, and I think it's controversial mainly because of the way that it's positioned from a PR experience. Instead of saying that when Taylor Swift is playing in the concert, the local menu board option will double in price because they know that they've got a footfall of X thousand customers. What they should actually be saying is actually in off-peak hours, our prices reduce, rather than saying our prices increase in peak hours. It's just a different way of doing it. But the surge pricing is another very powerful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a kind of a PR issue, like the cell phone companies used to here, where we used to have the, oh well, peak minutes were charged at 1. Back when in the old days, kids, there are going to be somebody on the audience who's going to call me out for being one of the olds for remembering this. But in the old days, kids, when we used to pay per minute for our cell phones, we would have that positive marketing of, oh, you want to do your calling in off peak because it's free, nights and weekend stuff. Well, yeah, that's the more positive aspect to the, oh my goodness, you're going to charge me more concept. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing up the positive side to that. Thank you. That's been discussed from the negative aspects before. It's not necessarily a terrible thing. And that just means you're planning when you stop by your local burger joint more, I would think. There's a really cool thing here that it's kind of drawing a corollary to another conversation I was having with one of our other esteemed colleagues who was a guest in a previous episode, where we were talking about retail media networks and their impact on as a whole. There's a lot of overlap here, isn't there? Right? So I'm imagining you would agree with that.
Yeah, well, you know that retail media networks are massive for NowSignage, and a big passion of mine. A bit of a call me a loser for that or whatever, but I love talking about retail media networks. So we do a lot of retail media networks, and traditionally they're obviously more kind of in the supermarkets environments or in the retail environments. But QSRs, you're right. What we're seeing with a lot of the big QSRs we're working for, they are a perfect place for an advertising network because they have lots of stores in prime locations and they have a huge amount of footfall. So that basically means that they become extremely attractive for brands wanting to advertise onto those screens.
Right? Because you're consuming food as a rule, so that ups your dwell time statistics. So that's definitely even more appealing, I would think, to an advertiser, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, with that footfall and the locations and the different kind of demographics that you can reach and the intelligence of the data that the stores have, all of this information helps with the cost of that ad point. But generally speaking, it's whether it's classed as exactly a retail media network. Retail media networks in principle thrive wherever there's a competitive marketplace of similar brands in close proximity to each other. So that's generally why they work great in a supermarket aisle. You've got similar products all in a line and they're competing for attention, so you serve a relevant advert to that product. In a QSR, that's not really happening. They're actually acting more like a traditional digital out-of-home network in the sense that you're slightly higher up in the funnel. You're capturing attention much earlier in that buying process rather than in the store environment where they're at the point of purchase. So I think that it's arguably a hybrid of the two. You're in the store environment, so it's a retail media network, but you're likely that it's for non-endemic brands, so non-supplier brands. So it's more of a traditional digital out of home. But what we are certainly seeing in this space is that the emergence of those paid partnerships or those full store takeovers. And again, that's just linking it back to kind of digital signage and technology and screen providers and hardware providers. Those paid partnerships and full store takeovers work brilliantly if you've got LED displays all around your store, if you've got menu boards that can all be synchronized so that at a click of a button or at a regular every 60 seconds, you might get a McDonald's Happy Meal Disney advert that's coming on the screen that all of a sudden transforms those Sony displays to having synchronization where it plays one video across there. And again, that is a retail media network because Disney have paid to promote their video onto that screen, or we're seeing brands like Little Caesars, for example, have just run a Call of Duty campaign on their menu board. So it works great, these retail media networks, because the brands want to advertise because they know the type of demographic going in that store. So if they identify that that's their target demographic, then they want to advertise there. And it's also beneficial for the QSR because sometimes in other instances, advertising non-relevant or non-endemic brands waters down the experience in the store. It kind of switches people off. Whereas in a QSR environment, if Nike wanted to advertise in Taco Bell, actually that makes Taco Bell look good as well. So it works for both parties because they're connecting with the similar audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get you to get the crystal ball out and want to talk a little about future trends and things you see coming down the pipeline. But I'm going to go on one other piece that I think is important, because I get people asking me this all the time, is the impact of mobile on digital signage as part of the strategy. And I know that anybody who's deploying a signage network has to consider mobile, because they think about, oh, this is competition to my signage in the space. But I think it's a little different at QSR, isn't it? Because there's a huge focus on the apps. I shudder to think about how many I have installed currently, but there's a huge focus on the app, as whether it's an ordering experience or a loyalty program. Not only would that have an influence on the data and demographics that they're collecting, because I'm opting in and they're associating the purchases with me, but doesn't that kind of change the experience interacting with space and what they might do?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a mobile phone in a QSR experience is part of that whole holistic experience as you go in there. So mobile phones, due to the nature of a mobile phone, you can have an app open, you can geolocate it, you can target it, you can have QR codes that you can interact via the mobile phone. They can become part of that experience as you walk into the store. And I think with the whole piece around kind of engaging and enticing and connecting with those customers to make them stay inside your store, the loyalty programs are really important for people coming back. And that can be both in the store environment itself, but also in a drive-through as you're coming through. So in that store environment, you're wanting to kind of welcome them as they come through the store if you know who they are, or you might want them to even scan a QR code and order via their phone rather than via the touch kiosk. You can then do that by setting the IP of the location, and you could actually just order in that restaurant on your mobile phone and kind of carry out that experience. I'd say the drive-through stuff is the real part where we can bring in that loyalty program and that connection again with the mobile and the interaction. We've seen that drive-throughs account for almost 2/3 of fast food purchases and up to 70% of the QSR's revenue. So that drive-through experience, again, as you're coming up to there, if you've got the loyalty program on your app, we can start doing really clever stuff with that, where we can say hi to you, we can identify what your native language is, and we can use AI technology to then convert that menu board into your native language, so that you can then order, if you're Spanish and you're coming up to the menu board, rather than it being in UK, US, English, then you can switch that menu board to a Spanish menu board. We can then start pulling off that mobile device, understanding what your preferences are. So kind of what you bought last time or what your preferred menu is, and we can start serving up special offers and special promotions, or just trying to surprise them with rewards. We know that from the reward scheme on the loyalty program, that if we want to surprise them, we might give them a free upgrade to an extra large meal or something like that. And all of those interactions, I think that's coming to your point where you've got the store, you've got the drive-through, you've got the loyalty apps and the mobile phones. All of that becomes part of that experience. As soon as you step into that boundary of the QSR area, you've got so many touch points with them.
Yeah, that's outstanding. All right, so what future trends do you see coming in the next few years? Because that was something I was not going to let us, before we go to Q&A, that was something I was not going to let us pick your brain on for our audience's benefit, because obviously you clearly are passionate about this. You know what's going on. What do you see happening?
I don't want to be too cliche with it, but a lot of stuff is going, sadly, I have to say, is going AI related. So sort of the drive-through stuff that I've been touching on there, there's the really intelligent stuff there where you can start to serve up the menu board in the native languages. I think that's a really cool use of technology, where it can just interact and immediately and understand that person as they're coming through. And there's also all the AI ordering systems we've seen with Taco Bell. There's been articles out there where I think they've now processed over 2 million successful orders across 300 Taco Bells. So that's AI ordering processes, and that brings in your point about kind of the efficiencies of labor and so on, and making it a more efficient process. So I think that they're really powerful things. I'd say stuff like the POS integrations, although they've been around a long time, they are getting a lot more powerful now. So some of the stuff that we can do with kind of targeting that message, dynamic real-time information, we're moving a lot more away from it just being a timetabled approach of having, on this day we're going to have this menu board, or in the morning we're going to have the morning menu, and then lunchtime the lunchtime menu. You're seeing brands like Little Caesars who have the hot and ready counters. What we can do there is that we can actually dynamically switch the content. So if they're wanting to create a hot and ready item, which is essentially a product that they're wanting to shift fast and make it easy and accessible to buy, we can, without them having to make any content changes, we can identify that it's gone to the hot and ready, we can change that content, and then we can remove it from the main menu board. So you start actually interacting and changing that menu board depending on understanding the environment, understanding the footfall, understanding the type of demographic within that store environment. And if you can do all of that dynamically without somebody having to get out a big spreadsheet and algorithm to say, at this time of the day in this store, I want this kind of content, you want it all to be intuitive and come naturally onto those screens. And I think that's the art of really clever digital signage software like ours, where we can start to use that data to make it a very efficient process to manage thousands and thousands of screens.
Outstanding. And by the way, you just helped everybody who's playing Screens Unscripted bingo. They got their AI marked off for this section. Every single one.
I'm sorry, yeah, you have to, don't you?
You do. I make jokes about it. I didn't prepare a joke this time, but I almost always make a joke. Let's get it out of the way. It's like the first bullet point in every class I do. So we're going to do some Q&A with our audience because I know we're going to come up on time. But before we go to Q&A, which I'm also doing a little tap dancing to let our audience ask any other questions, we've got a few really good ones in the chat already. But before we do that, I always ask our guests for a small favor. If you could leave our audience today with 2 to 3 key takeaways from our discussion, what would they be?
I'd probably start with the big touch point that we did right at the start there. I do think that if you are, whether you are a QSR on the call today or whether you're an integrator, always start with that piece of understanding the storytelling process. What are they wanting to communicate? What are they wanting to do with that signage? So if you can start with that, start understanding what their content's trying to achieve, you can then recommend the right technologies and the right solution for the needs that are going to convert the customer and drive the sales. So I definitely start with that. I think that things like the loyalty programs are going to take a lot bigger role within digital signage, where QSRs, because there's so much competition out there for attention and for space and for driving people into the stores, it's not a one-time transaction. They don't just want someone to pop in there and then go to the competitor the next week. They want them to keep coming back. So those loyalty programs and how you can take that from the mobile experience that you were saying, where I get a reward, I want to be seeing that I'm getting that reward in that store environment, in that drive-through experience. So I'd say that's probably a big takeover. And then the other take home probably to do with all the trigger technology and the real-time information. There's a lot of powerful technology out there, and platforms like ours, because of the way we have an open API, we can integrate with all those sources so that you can do weather triggers, geolocation triggers, stock rotation triggers, audience measure with age and gender that we've not even touched on today. But all of that trigger technology is extremely powerful. So I definitely consider, how do you not only tell the story through the store, but how do you then personalize that journey to identify whether it's an individual or whether it's you understand that the demographic at this time of the day is largely X category of person. How do you then use technology to then communicate the right messages?
Beautiful. All right, so we got some great questions for you. Our audience has been busy typing. So let's see if I can share a few of these. We can get them some answers. And there's a couple here I'm really interested in hearing your take on too. So first one, as inflation in the price of groceries and regular restaurant meals has been high in recent years, does that give a boost to the attractiveness of a QSR meal? If yes, how can digital signage help with that trend to highlight value to the customer, help with pricing, or other things?
Yes, I think it is helping. I know that there's a stat out there. Actually, I can't recall the stat exactly off the top of my head, but I think it's something along the lines of those. I think it's something like 84% of consumers are they actually prefer use of their leisure time rather than entertaining at home now and cooking a meal and inviting friends round. They will actually want to go into a store environment, into a QSR, and use their leisure time like that. And I think that is, again, largely coming down to cost as well, because actually to entertain at home and buy the groceries and buy the goods and do the cooking, actually going into that that QSR experience where, because technology is creating such an experience in there, you can have an amazing time. It's a place that you want to stay and you want to hang out in. It's got music, it's got everything going on in there. I think even some of them now have DJ sets and stuff on a Friday night and stuff. So I've seen quite a few doing that. So certainly it's that experience of driving someone there. There's obviously the cost savings. And then I know that a lot of the QSRs as well, they are trying to really focus on kind of the calories and the health count as well. So there are healthy options out there as well. So I don't think it is just I'm going to a QSR and it has to be greasy, it has to be really unhealthy for me. Of course, there are those options and they're great for a treat and great for a trip too. But there's also options out there where for a very cost-effective price, you get in those healthy options as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that globally that folks from outside the US think about a little differently, where for us here, you know, most folks in the US tend to have larger homes. So the historical trend was entertaining at home, where like you spend time in Asia, the default is you go to a QSR, you go to a restaurant or to a bar, and that's your space to entertain because you're living in a postage stamp. So that's a really great perspective. I think it's kind of waking people up to some of that these days, especially here stateside. So a kind of a follow-on to that, what is happening with the growth of QSR in general compared to other hot formats like fast casual?
Do you have more examples of that one?
Yeah, we'll give the question asker a chance to kind of give a little bit more because I don't have anything else there. Let's go on to the next question for you. Nick, you mentioned dynamic pricing. Very interesting. Any examples from the field? Did it work as planned for the retailer or for the customer or both?
Yeah, dynamic pricing is relatively straightforward, really. As long as you've got the technology and the infrastructure there, and there's several ways that you can do a dynamic pricing setup. Ideally, you do it through a POS integration. So once we have that stock information, we know exactly kind of what that product is, what that price is, what the description of that product is, and you can take it a lot more than dynamic pricing. We can then serve different currency variants. So we can have dollars, we can have British pounds, we can have Canadian dollars, and so on. And you can be serving the different rates of prices based on that POS integration. We can also do it through JSON feeds. We can do it through CSV files. It becomes a bit more manual and laborious at that point. But as long as we have a location ID, we can then set rules within the platform to say that if it comes in within this classification of tier or category, then based on that, we can dynamically choose the same product, but show a different price based on that. And that's where the surge pricing can come in as well. We can start setting rules within the CMS to say, at this time, inflate the price by 10%. And I think a lot of this dynamic pricing stuff, as long as you've got the rules and the technology in place to implement it, then it's actually relatively simple to go and do the dynamic pricing stuff. But it works really effectively. You can imagine if you've got a large QSR that has 6,000 locations, there's absolutely no chance that you're going to have a marketing person creating menu boards and prices for those 6,000. So it has to be dynamic, and it has to go to that extent where it's not just a case of I go into the CMS and go into the layout creation tool. We have a layout creation tool, but it's not really dynamic if you're just going in there and manually changing the price. The dynamic element is when we can pull that data from somewhere and intelligently change the price without someone manually intervening. And I suppose in answer to the question, as long as the infrastructure of the QSR has the right PARS systems or has the right data or the infrastructure, then yes, it's a relatively straightforward process.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, this is a good one. So I've got one more question currently in the queue. If anybody else has any final questions, because we'll wrap up here in just a couple of minutes, but I'm going to ask Nick the last one we have in the queue. This is your last warning. You have last call. This is a good one though. Is license plate recognition something that QSRs are adopting currently?
It's a big discussion point. So we integrate with a lot of audience measurement platforms that are out there, and a lot of those audience measurement platforms and camera systems, they can do the license plate recognition. So it depends on how intrusive you want to be. There's some stuff that I think is getting borderline a bit too intrusive. I think personally on not license plate stuff, but on the ordering system, if you understand that customer, saying hi to that person is for me okay, and saying I notice you've ordered a cheeseburger before, do you want a cheeseburger again, that's okay. I think when you start saying how's your kids, how's your family, you're going too far at that point, because you don't know personal circumstances. And so, and I'd say the registration and license plate information's a little bit similar. What we've seen, and we've done POCs with this, we haven't actually done anywhere it's fully taken off, to be fair, but what we can see is that you can get the technology to detect makes of models and also the license plate information, so you can determine if it's got 4 people in the car, hence serve a family menu, or if it detects that it's a certain brand of car, you can serve different. If you detect a luxury brand, you can serve up a luxury menu. If you notice it's an old banger, you might serve up the pound saver menu or the dollar saver menu or whatever. But it's questions over where's the line to be drawn. But in answer to the question, yes, we are seeing conversations around license plate detection to serve personalized menu options and based on that customer, and also detection of the actual car, the make and the model of the car, to again influence in the drive-through the menu that's actually served to that customer type.
Excellent. We did get one last question. I'm going to see if I can sneak this in. Nick, if you'll be kind enough to give us your thoughts on this. So it seems some US city governments are trying to limit by legislation the big emphasis on drive-throughs in the QSRs. What's your opinion? What are your thoughts? Are you seeing that? Is that something you've run into?
Limit the number of the drive-throughs.
Well, limit the number of drive-through traffic. I actually, so just I'll add my color commentary on top of the asker's question. I know here in California, we have restrictions about how long a vehicle can be set and idling in a drive-through as kind of a start, and that's become a factor. But also doing things like trying to help manage traffic. I know that's something that they're now experimenting with in New York, where they just introduced like surge pricing on traffic tolls. You know, parts of the day you don't pay one. Now parts of the day in certain parts of Manhattan you pay a toll just to drive on the streets that we're not. Is this something you've run into?
I think it's probably where you are globally with implementing this as well, because I'd say that in the US you are very drive-through focused. I know that a lot of their customers won't actually go to a QSR if there's not a drive-through. It's as black and white as that. And as I said earlier, in a lot of QSRs, 2/3 of the purchasing is done through a QSR and 70% of that QSR revenue. Whereas I think if you would go to even places like the UK or Sweden and so on, I don't think it would be that high threshold. I think that people still do quite often go into that store environment. So what we've seen with the big global QSRs that we're working with, generally speaking, when we're talking about drive-throughs, the drive-throughs tend to be established in the US, whereas the rollout plans for Europe or Australia or Asia, quite often those new builds are having drive-throughs put into them. So I'd say the opposite in a lot of the world. Drive-throughs are becoming the real focus to say, how do we, probably mirroring what's happened in the US, and now that's gone to the other extreme in the US, where you're now almost wanting to get people back into the store. But yeah, a bit of a balance on both of those. We're seeing actually more growth in the drive-throughs, but I think that's because we operate globally across lots of regions where they're actively wanting to grow the drive-through networks.
Excellent, excellent. I appreciate that. Thank you for letting me sneak in one more question. I know we're a little bit over time. especially given it's late in the day. I mean, you're in the late evening there in Sweden, so we really appreciate you joining us.
No worries at all.
So much for participating in today's session. Thank you for your support. Really appreciate all the insights. I know I enjoyed the conversation, and as usual, I learned a couple of things along the way. So thank you very much for being here. If anyone wants to learn more about NowSignage, where would be a great place to go? I imagine ISE for those overseas might be a good highlight coming up here.
Absolutely, yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on, Jonathan, and thanks for having me on, Sony. In terms of NowSignage, to find out more about us, we've got teams over in the US, so please reach out to our regional teams. But if as a starting point, if you go to nowsignage.com, we are at ISE, which is the big European show that's coming up. So we've got a big stand out there. If any of you are over for that, brilliant. I know that we've been doing things like NRF, we're doing Infocom over in the US, so we'll also have a presence over there in the US at quite a lot of your upcoming events. So yeah, please keep an eye out for us. And as I say, I imagine a lot of the customer base and integrators on the call today will probably be US based, so please reach out to Sean or Robert, and we'd love to start working with you guys.
Outstanding. Well, again, thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. Thank you to all of you out in the audience, especially those of you who have attended multiple sessions. I greatly appreciate seeing the repeat names. And of course, I would be incredibly remiss if I didn't again thank our sponsor, Sony, for helping us produce this series. Stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to continue to put on a whole nother group of shows. We've got some great guests lined up. So stay tuned for more information. Again, thank you all. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And Nick, go spend some time with the family and get some sleep. It's late.
They're all in bed now, probably. I'll watch some TV. Good stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again. Appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Bye-bye.